In my last video of this now two-part series, I showed how to build a WordPress site from scratch on Google Cloud Platform. In this video, I'll be showing you how to secure and optimize your WordPress site. Now, one thing I have to make clear before I start this video is made with self-hosted WordPress installations in mind, like what I did in my last video. If you're with a shared or managed web host where you don't have direct access to the server that your site is hosted on, then most of these points you won't be able to use. Though there are a few that will still be useful to you, though the exact procedures of how to implement these on a web hosting product might be different. For example, the part that involves creating a custom plugin, which you'll understand why I'm doing that when I actually get to that part. But with that said, let's go harden our WordPress site, and then I'll give you a tip to improve its performance. All right, so now the first most important point I'm going to make is make sure WordPress is kept up to date and that you have automatic updates enabled on WordPress core and all themes and plugins. I've said this in the last video, but I'm going to say it again because it's really important. If you don't keep your stuff up to date, you open yourself up to security exploits. Next best practice, audit your installed themes and plugins and remove anything that is not absolutely necessary for your site to function. The less extra code you have, the better. Remember that 96% of WordPress exploits come from plugins. Again, 96% of WordPress exploits come from plugins. That, and the more plugins you have installed, the more overhead your site has, which will slow down your site, especially if you're using a Google Cloud micro instance. I know I've said this in my last video, but I want to say it again because I want to make sure I beat it into your head even further. Because I think that's absolutely essential for any WordPress site. That being said, there is one plugin that I think is absolutely essential for every WordPress site. And if you go to Add Plugin, I'll show you what I'm talking about. It's called Two-Factor. And you have to scroll down a little bit to find it, but it's this one, the Two-Factor plugin by WordPress themselves. And this will add support for two-factor authentication to your WordPress site. And that makes it so that way, if someone gets a hold of your password, which I'm sure is a strong password, right? Then it doesn't automatically mean that now hackers have access to your admin panel. And again, it's by WordPress.org themselves. So I'm actually surprised that this is not included in WordPress core. In 2025, it's absolutely essential that you're using two-factor authentication on all your accounts. So let's install that now and activate that. Again, make sure you're getting the one from WordPress.org. Stay away from third-party plugins unless you have a specific reason to use one of those. But anyway, once you've got that installed and activated, don't forget to enable automatic updates, which you should be doing for all your plugins. Okay, now once we got that installed, if we come to users and then click on profile, and then if we scroll down, we will now see two-factor options. And then this will give us a few options for two-factor authentication. I would recommend checking at least two, just in case your primary method fails. Then you have backup. Now keep in mind that if you haven't set up an email server on your server, then the email option won't work. By the way, I'll go over how to set up an email server in my next video. But then once you've selected your options and done any setup that's required, just be sure to click update profile and away you go. But anyway, speaking of users, make sure you don't have any more users than what you actually need, because the more you have, the more doors that you have open into your admin panel. And when setting their roles, make sure that you give them the lowest privilege level that they actually need to do their job. Don't just hand out administrator willy-nilly. Okay, so now once you've got that done, the next steps will require you to have direct access to your server, because Again, this video is assuming that you're doing this on a self-hosted installation. But anyway, the next step is to disable directory indexing in Apache. Let me explain why we need to do that. Right now, in a directory where there's no index.html or index.php file, Apache will actually show a list of files in that directory. Let me show you what I mean. I can go look at the WordPress core files by going to my website /wp includes, and I'll look at this. Here's a list of core files for WordPress, which I can then go audit this list and then look at which files have exploits, and that just makes my job as a hacker so much easier. Not good. So let's disable that. To do that, go into your terminal and then SSH your website, and then enter the passphrase for your SSH private key. Again, I've set all this up in my last video. And then do sudo nano /etc/apache2 /apache2.conf to get into your Apache configuration file, and then come all the way down until you see directory/var/www. And then within that, you're going to make a new line. Make sure to begin it with a tab, and make sure that it's between directory and /directory. And then type options space minus indexes, exactly like that. Then hit Control X, Y, and then enter to save. Now, before applying our configuration, we should test our configuration with sudo apache ctl -t to make sure that we didn't make any errors. Yep, syntax okay. So now we can apply these changes by restarting Apache with sudo systemctl restart apache 2. And now if we refresh, we now get a 403 forbidden error, meaning that we can't browse any core files. And this will also make it so that you don't end up leaking any media files that you've uploaded but not published yet. So now the next thing we want to do is disable the XML-RPC API, which is enabled by default on all WordPress versions beginning with 3.5, which came out in 2012. XML-RPC allows you to manage your WordPress site and add and delete content with the mobile app. However, XML-RPC also makes it easier for hackers to brute force your site. Because, for example, if we come to our WP admin panel by going to our website /admin, now we get to our login page, if we're not logged in yet. Traditionally, if an attacker wanted to try 1,000 different passwords, they would have to make 1,000 different requests to your website. XML-RPC will essentially allow them to try like 50 passwords all at once. That makes it much easier and more efficient to brute force your WP admin panel. So this is something that I would recommend disabling unless you're actually using it. And nowadays, mobile browsers have gotten so good that you don't even need to use a dedicated native app. Just go to your website /WP admin in your mobile browser. So now let me show you how to disable it. If we come back into our Apache configuration file by doing sudo nano /etc /apache2 /apache2.conf, and then come back down to where you have /var/www, you're going to make a new line, put angled brackets, and then within those, put files match. And by the way, I'll have all this in the description. Double quotes, and then in those double quotes, put XML-RPC.php. And that references the XML-RPC.php file, which if we go to that, I'm going to go to demo.drewadamtech.com /XML-RPC.php. As you can see, that file is live and accepting requests. Well, we're going to change that. So now once you've got that line in, you're going to hit enter after it, hit tab, and then type require all denied, exactly like that. Then hit enter, then put angled brackets, and then within those type /files match to close this off. Then hit Control X, then hit Y, then hit enter. And now we can test our Apache configuration again to make sure we didn't make a mistake. No, we didn't. So let's restart Apache. And now if we refresh that, XML-RPC.php, now get the forbidden error, which means that now that API is inaccessible. Now you may be asking, but can't you just delete this file? Well, you can. Only problem with that is that that file will be added back on the next WordPress update, which is especially annoying if you have automatic updates enabled, which I'm assuming you do in order to make sure you have all the latest security patches, right? So now the very next thing we're going to do is disable the REST API for unauthenticated users. Now, what's the REST API? Glad you asked. So now, if we go into our site health under tools, and then if we look at past tests, scroll down, you'll be able to find a line that says the REST API is available. It'll basically give you a shorthand explanation of what the REST API is. That's how WordPress and other applications communicate with your site. It's an essential feature of WordPress's WP admin. However, random visitors to your site have no legitimate reason to be using the REST API. But right now, it is accessible to anyone that visits your site. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to open a private window so that I'm not authenticated. Then go to my website /wp-json. And oh, look at this. So now we got some information about my site. One part of this that I'd be really interested in as a hacker is if I go to /wp-json/wp/v2/users. And oh, look at this, I can see my username here, which that's a good first step to getting hacked. Although you need a username and a password, and in our case, a second verification code in order to do anything nefariously useful. But still though, this is not something you want to have publicly available. So let me show you how to disable that. To do this, we're going to create a custom plugin. So now we're going to come back to our SSH console and then type sudo nano www/httml/wp-content/plugins/disable-rest-api.php. And then this will create a new file. So first of all, we have to create a header. So now we can find instructions on how to create a plugin header on this page that I'll have linked in the description. But first of all, we got to start this with left-angled bracket, $PHP, to tell the computer that this is a PHP file. Then hit enter. And then if we scroll down on the header requirements page, come down to minimum fields, this is the bare minimum that we need on our plugin header. So let's copy that and paste it into our file. Basically, it specifies our plugin name. So you can replace your plugin name with your desired plugin name. I'm going to call it disable REST API for unauthenticated users. And now below that, come to this page, also linked in the description, and then copy this snippet of code and then paste it in your custom plugin file below the header. Then hit Control X, Y, and then enter to save. And now if we go back to our WP admin panel and then go to our plugins, we'll see this new plugin. And all we have to do is activate it. So now if we go to our site from a private window and try to access the REST API without being logged in, we get this "you are not currently logged in" error. And even if we try to look at our usernames, nope, you can't do it. But logged in users can still access the REST API. So all the functions and features of our WP admin panel will continue to work. By the way, WordPress has some great developer documentation. If you want to learn all about WordPress plugin and theme development, this is a great resource. So now, let me quickly show you the wrong way to add a custom PHP script to your site that everyone else will tell you to do. Just go to Tools, Theme File Editor, and then functions.php in your currently active theme. Then add your function to the bottom of this file, and then watch it get overwritten by theme updates. So, bad advice, do not follow that. Creating a custom plugin will ensure that your custom functionality doesn't get overwritten by updates. In fact, part of the reason why we have plugins is to prevent our custom functionality from being overwritten by updates. Another thing you could do is create a child theme so that your custom functions are preserved on theme updates. I'm not going to go over how to do that in this video, and if you ever want to switch themes in the future, then it makes migration a lot more cumbersome. And the thing is, with a child theme, you have to create it like the moment you create your website before making any customizations to your theme. Otherwise, you have to start all over. So that's why I prefer the custom plugin method. And by the way, you can also write your custom PHP script on your computer and then upload it here by clicking Add Plugin and then Upload Plugin. But I personally prefer to work directly from the server. All right, so now the next step is to tune our npm prefork configuration, because we're working with a micro instance, which, in case you haven't seen my last video, that has one shared CPU core and 1 GB of RAM. And by default, Apache allows way more traffic than it should on a little bitty micro instance. So let's change that. We've got to go into our SSH console and then do sudo nano/etc/mods-available/npm_prefork.conf. Okay, and basically this right here is tuned for a full system, which this micro instance obviously is not. So now let me show you how I tune this, given my resources. Again, one shared CPU core, 1 GB of RAM. You don't have to copy this exactly, and of course this will change depending on what specs your server has, but kind of have this in the back of your mind. Like, this is how I like to tune a micro instance. So start servers 1, min spare servers 2, max spare servers 5, max request workers 15, and then max connections per child. Now, I like to actually configure this. I like to set it to like 1,000 or some crazy number like that. If a single server process is going to have more than that, then obviously it's a runaway connection and it's probably best to shut that process down. What this does is it prevents excessive requests from bogging down your server, or even worse, crashing it. So now we're gonna hit Control X, then Y, then Enter to save and close the file, and then do a sudo apache ctl-t to test our configuration. Just good practice anytime you edit your Apache configuration. And remember, every time you edit your Apache configuration, you got to restart Apache for the changes to take effect by doing sudo systemctl restart Apache 2. Okay, so now another thing we can do to mitigate DDoS attacks is to install an Apache module called mod-evasive. To do that, do sudo apt install lib apache 2-mod-evasive, then hit yes to install these packages. And now this installs the postfix package, which is the SMTP server for Linux. This is something that I'm going to be setting up in my next video. But for now, we're just going to hit 1 for no configuration. So now we're going to configure mod-evasive with sudo nano /etc /apache 2 /mods-available /evasive.conf. And now I'm going to show you how I like to configure this. So first of all, uncomment all these lines beginning with DOS. And again, this is another thing that's tuned for a full system. DOS hash table size, I like to set it to 1,000 for a system with 1 gig of RAM. And this just prevents mod-evasive's IP table from getting too large. For a WordPress site, you're probably gonna wanna allow for more requests because there's certain functions that will make a bunch of requests in 1 second. So DOS page count 20, DOS site count 50, and then DOS page interval and DOS site interval are both set to 1. Basically, mod-evasive will allow you to set different parameters for individual pages versus the whole site. So how we have it configured is allow 20 requests to an individual page per 1 second. DOS site count 50 allows 50 requests to any page on the site per 1 second. Obviously, if we get more than that in a single second, then obviously it's a DOS attempt, and it's probably best to shut them down. Now we come down to DOS blocking period, which by default blocks offending IP addresses for 10 seconds. I think that is way too short. Set this to at least 5 minutes or 300 seconds, and that's it. And by the way, don't worry about DOS email notify because we don't have our email configuration set up yet, so this will not work. But anyway, hit Control-X, then hit Y, then hit Enter to save. Now again, do sudo apache ctl-t, make sure that our syntax is okay, and then sudo systemctl restart apache 2. So now the next step is to install and configure a web application firewall, specifically an open source web application firewall called modsecurity. This will not only perform an additional layer of DDoS mitigation, but also protect against common attacks like SQL injection and cross-site scripting attacks. So first of all, we get to install modsecurity with sudo apt install lib apache 2 -mod-security 2, then hit yes to install. Now we got to configure modsecurity. First of all, we got to copy the recommended configuration file into our main configuration file with sudo cp/etc/modsecurity .conf-rec amended space /etc/modsecurity/modsecurity.conf. Okay, and now we can get to actually configuring mod security by doing sudo nano /etc/modsecurity/modsecurity.conf. Now come down to sec rule engine and then change detection only to on to actually enable mod security. And now come down to sec request body limit and then change this to what you have post max size set to in your php.ini file, which I showed in my last video. If you don't know what that is, you can check this by going to Tools, Site Health in your WP admin panel, then go to info, then server, then you can find this under PHP post max size, which is 26 megabytes. That equals to 27,262,976 bytes. Now press Ctrl X, Y, and then enter to save and close the file. And then next we gotta make changes to our mod security core rule set configuration file. Now the mod security core rule set is essentially a set of rules that detect and block common web attacks, and it comes with the libapache 2 mod security 2 package. So we're going to edit the configuration for that with sudo nano /etc /mod security /crs -setup.conf and come down to application specific rule exclusions and then scroll down to here. So now we need to uncomment a few lines here like so. Uncomment the first 6 lines. Okay, now come down to where it says WordPress right here. Uncomment that. Then we've got to move this up to here by hitting Control K while we're on that line to cut that line. And then come up to here, like move your cursor just below the uncommented lines, then hit Control U to paste it. And now we've got to replace the backslash at the end with a double quote, then hit Control X, Y, and then enter to save. And now do sudo apache ctl-t to test our configuration. Now do sudo systemctl restart apache 2 to restart Apache and apply our configuration. So now we can test our firewall by going to our website and then /ID equals 1 space or space. And yes, I am putting spaces in the address bar on purpose. And then quotes 1 equals 1, exactly like that. Then hit enter. And then if you set that up correctly, we should get a 403 forbidden error when we do that. Basically, this simulates an SQL injection attack. So now all that you have to do is basically just test your site, make sure that everything works. Now, one thing I've identified that does not work with mod security by default is the site health tool. It thinks it's a cross-site scripting attack. So now I'm going to show you how to add an exemption for that. To do this, first, we're going to have to identify what specific rule is causing the problem. We can access our mod security log file by doing sudo nano /var/log /apache2 /modsec_audit.log. So now this is a pretty big file. So basically you're going to look for the offending URI by doing Control W and then search for the URI that you're trying to access, like the part right after your domain, and keep hitting Control W and then hitting enter until you get to something that looks like this. And what you're looking for is an access denied with code 403. That's what you're looking for. And then you should see your IP address as the client. Now, I've went ahead and replaced my public IP with a dummy IP so that I don't have to bother blurring it out during editing. But anyway, if we come down to the relevant line, we should see our URI there. And then if we scroll more to the left, we'll see the rule ID that's actually causing problems. So those are the two pieces of information that we need. Now to actually create an exception for, in this case, our site health page, what you do is you take the rule ID and the URI. You're gonna get out of this file. Well, I'm not gonna save it because we don't actually wanna modify log files. And then do sudo nano /etc /modsecurity /crs/ put caps lock on, request. Now this file name is actually very long. Here's a shortcut. Just hit the tab key to autocomplete that. then hit enter. So you're looking for the request 900 exclusion rules before crs.conf. That's a mouthful. That's why we use the tab key. And then just scroll all the way to the bottom of this file. And then I've actually went ahead and pre-written an exclusion rule, which you can just copy and paste from the description for the site health page. But basically, put your URI here and put your rule ID here. And by the way, if you wanted to have multiple exclusions on one line, just replace ID colon 1002 with ID colon 1003, and then add additional rule IDs with comma CTL colon rule remove by ID equals, and then the ID number, and then so on and so forth. But once we got that, just hit Control X, then Y, then hit enter. Again, it's a good idea to check our Apache configuration, make sure that the syntax is okay, then restart Apache. And now if we refresh our sitehealth.php, now we should get to it. Actually, speaking of sitehealth.php, one thing that WordPress is suggesting that we do is set up page caching. Let's go do that right now. So come back to our terminal. We're going to enable a couple PHP modules for caching by doing sudo a2n mod cache, and then sudo a2n mod cache _ disk. And now we got to go into the cache disk configuration file with sudo nano /etc /apache2 /mods -available /cache _ disk.conf, and then uncomment cache enabled disk, and then below that add a line that says cache disable space /wp admin to exclude our WP admin directory from being cached on the server side. We don't want that. Then hit Control X, Y, and then enter to save. And the cache disk module configures caching on the server side. Now, in order to prevent the cache disk module from breaking our site, the next thing we have to do is edit WordPress's htaccess file by doing sudo nano /var /www /html /htaccess, and then come down to the last rewrite rule here, and then right after that, take away this dot, and then replace it with caret bracket dot star bracket $, and then after /index.php, type $1, and then hit Control X, Y, and then enter to save. So now in order to prevent WordPress from overwriting our changes, we need to make this read-only to WordPress. To do that, we can change the ownership of this htaccess file to the root user by doing sudo chown root :root /var /www /html /htaccess. And now we've got to configure caching on the client side as well by doing sudo nano /etc /apache2 /sites -available /000 -default -le -ssl.conf. And by the way, this is assuming that you've configured HTTPS on your website, which I've gone over how to do in my last video. But anyway, you're going to come down to the bottom of this file, and then just before the /virtual host line, you're going to create a new line, and then copy and paste in this line. Header set cache -control public, and then max age is however long you want your page to be cached in seconds. and this will control both on the client and on the server side. And then you can change this depending on your needs. Like if you're constantly posting new content, then I would set this to an hour or even half an hour. Since I'm not updating my site very frequently, I have mine set to 86,400 seconds for 1 day. I wouldn't go more than that. But anyway, hit Control X, then Y, and then enter to save. And then just do sudo Apache CTL -t to make sure that our syntax is okay. Now before we apply this configuration by restarting Apache, there's one change you gotta make in our WP admin panel. We go to our profile, and that is show toolbar when viewing site. Let me show you what that looks like. So we're gonna go visit our site, and if we're logged in, it shows this toolbar, which is nice and convenient for us. But the problem is, if you have caching enabled, Apache will actually cache this too. And obviously you don't want that. Now it won't allow access to your WP admin panel, so if a random user were to just click on one of these options, it'll just take them to your login page. But still though, having this displayed for every user is not a good user experience. So the best solution is just disable that by unchecking show toolbar when viewing site in your user's profile settings. And by the way, you should do this for all users on your site if you have multiple users on your site. And then just be sure to scroll down and then hit update profile. And now if we reload our site, then it's gone. But you could still get into your admin panel by going to your site /admin or /wp-admin. And in case you're wondering where the edit site function is, that's the equivalent of going to appearance and then editor. But anyway, now we can restart Apache to apply our caching by doing sudo system ctl restart Apache 2. And now if we go back to our site health, you will see that now that caching recommendation is gone. Like we could still find it under past tests. It's at the very bottom. Page cache is detected and the server response time is good. As you can see, if you've been paying attention, you'll notice that our median server response time went way down to 11 milliseconds, which is great. Like, you will notice a dramatic difference on your site. Now, you won't see really much of a difference, if any at all, on your WP admin panel, since that's specifically exempt. But first of all, this produces a much better user experience for your viewers. And it also helps to minimize the impact of DDoS attacks, because then each request doesn't create as much load on the server. Now, many people will suggest using the WP Cache plugin, which is a great option if you're on a shared hosting plan where you don't have access to the server that your website is on. And it's also a more user-friendly option for if you're setting up a website for someone else. By the way, in order to force a refresh of the server's cache, just press Ctrl-Shift-R in your browser. And just one other side tip before I close off this video, I'm just going to show you the Lazy Load for Videos plugin, which is a plugin I'd recommend having if you have YouTube embeds on your site. Basically what this plugin does is, if I come over to my site right now, it'll basically do what's called lazy loading YouTube embeds, so that it won't actually have the device go out to YouTube and retrieve that video until the user hits the play button, which is a great way to cut down on loading times, because YouTube embeds run a lot of extra JavaScript, which can really bog down your page, especially if you have a lot of them on a page. Now, just one last point before I close off this video, and this should go without saying, but if you haven't already, enable HTTPS on your website. I went over how to get a free SSL certificate from Let's Encrypt in my last video, and it is trusted by modern browsers and operating systems. That being said, I'm going to just show you a quick optional step you can do to add an additional layer of security. Let me explain. By default, any certificate authority can issue a trusted SSL certificate for your domain. In order to limit the certificate authorities who can issue certificates for our domain, what you're going to do is you're going to create a CAA record in your DNS with your registrar, and this should be on your root domain. TTL you can leave auto, and the tag should be only allow specific host names, equivalent of the issue tag, like that's what it actually is in the DNS. And in our case, since we got a certificate from Let's Encrypt, for the CA domain name, you're going to put let'sencrypt.org. And what that'll do is that will only allow Let's Encrypt to issue certificates for our domain. Now, there's one more thing you can do to harden your site against brute force attacks, and that is limiting login attempts. There are many ways to accomplish this, but the method I use is fail2ban, which, in case you're unfamiliar, is a program that blocks IP addresses on the server's firewall for a certain amount of time after too many failed login attempts. I'll go over that in a future video. Also, stay tuned for my next video, where I'll show you how to install and configure a basic email server so that you can send and receive email using your own domain name. In the meantime, be sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a like, comment, share with your friends, all that good stuff, and see you next time.